Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for attending this webinar. As Connie said, I'm Steve Bernstein, and I work in the Division of Health IT in AHRQ's Center for Evidence and Practice Improvement. This webinar kicks off an exciting, important, and new AHRQ initiative as part of AHRQ's strategic efforts to assess stakeholder needs and understand current and recommend future approaches to better disseminate and implement AHRQ's evidence, data, and tools and other resources. We're doing all of this to accelerate moving evidence to action and transforming care delivery. We are excited to have all of you join this call and initiative, and we look forward to working with you this year as you have time so we can serve your needs better. And I'm excited now to introduce you to our speaker, Dr. Jerry Osheroff, who is leading our work with this stakeholder community. I know many of you have already worked with Jerry. Jerry is an expert in quality improvement and clinical decision support and guiding collaborative efforts like this one. Also, I'd like to recognize the outstanding efforts of our project support team, including Katrina Lassom, Amal Saeed, and Dani Saeed. Jerry, I'm turning the mic over to you now to begin the presentation.
Thanks very much, Steve, and thanks everybody for joining us on this call and this initiative. We are very, very excited about our opportunity to improve care delivery and outcomes together. Our primary goal for today is to start building a shared understanding of how we can do that and get you excited about this collaboration as we are. We're all working on transforming care. If we're going to make this happen faster by working together, we need to understand what we're all trying to accomplish, what we're doing to get there, and how our separate actions can fit together better in realizing our shared goals. During this kickoff, we'll lay out preliminary frameworks for fleshing out a shared desired future and steps we can take together to get there. By the end of the call, we hope everyone has a sense of how the work we've outlined can help each of you and your organization with mission-critical needs, since AHRQ's goals depend on that. As a reminder, please use the chat function to raise any questions or comments at any time during this call. We might not be able to address all of them today, but we will get to all of them after the call at the latest. As Steve mentioned, the ACTS project is an important initiative for addressing AHRQ's goal of supporting better care processes and outcomes, and its 3 agency focus areas for doing that: research, data, and practice improvement. This diagram shows how these focus areas together support a learning health system. For example, by funding and synthesizing research evidence about what works in healthcare, providing proven strategies and tools for applying information to improve practice, and providing data about care results to close the continuous improvement loop. As taxpayers, we provide AHRQ with hundreds of millions of dollars each year to support this virtuous cycle. AHRQ would like to provide a much higher return on this investment, and the ACTS project, Advancing Evidence-Based Care, AHRQ Evidence-Based Care Transformation Support, will produce a roadmap and concept demonstration for increasing this ROI. So the goal for AHRQ, ACTS, and presumably for all of you is to improve evidence-based care and care transformation. Many different stakeholders have to work differently and collaborate better to achieve this goal. We've convened the ACTS stakeholder community to richly represent and bring together these stakeholder groups. For example, those who receive and provide care and the complex ecosystem that supports these activities. All these voices are important in the stakeholder community work and in our deliverables. Here are the smiling faces of the project team that Steve mentioned. Steve from AHRQ and his 4 contractors, Donnie, Amal, Kat, and me. This slide is a snapshot of the stakeholder groups and specific organizations that we've engaged in launching ACTS. The categorization is, of course, a rough first pass if your organization doesn't seem to be in the right place, and we can certainly fine-tune that later. The point is that there are already around 100 people from organizations that play important roles in care delivery and transformation that are interested in working together under this initiative. We hope to further build on this great power and breadth as ACTS unfolds. So let's dig deeper into what we're trying to accomplish. The key problem is that we're far from achieving the virtuous learning health system cycle we showed earlier. And we know a lot about what works in healthcare, but don't do nearly as well as we could in applying it to care for individuals and populations. A major reason for this is that we don't get the right information to the right people in the right ways to support effective decisions and actions. A lot of people, process, and technology challenges, as we all know, get in the way. Through AHRQ, we all invest heavily in research, data, and tools that should be doing much more to make patients healthier, make care delivery more rewarding for patients and care teams, and ensure better use of limited resources. That is, AHRQ offerings should be helping us get much closer to this so-called quadruple aim than we are now. We believe some of the obstacles to better value from AHRQ's offerings include suboptimal ways that potential users identify and access these resources and integrate them into their workflow. We'll work with the stakeholder community to better understand the barriers to applying what we know works, the transformed future state that care delivery stakeholders are working toward, and what they're doing to get there. This will provide the context for defining specific ways that AHRQ and other stakeholders can more effectively ensure that knowledge about what works in healthcare is applied successfully and results in better outcomes than we have today. This slide outlines our work plan through this October. It shows how we'll accelerate care transformation through better application of AHRQ assets and also by enhancing other great work now underway in all of your organizations. The foundational step is building this collaboration with you, the ACTS stakeholder community. Since you are all current or potential AHRQ customers or partners, you play a critical role in charting the path for how AHRQ offerings can serve you better. A key byproduct of this collaborative work is surfacing ways that all the stakeholders can work together better to achieve shared goals. A consensus model for how AHRQ's clinical evidence, guidance, and other resources could support care transformation must account for a complex and evolving information ecosystem that's driving care processes and outcomes improvement. Every one of you and your organizations has a huge stake in transforming healthcare, and you're doing a lot to make this transformation happen. A key initial ACTS deliverable is synthesizing an overview of our collective current state. To do this, we must understand what are the needs for evidence-informed tools to support care, and how are these needs currently addressed, how does AHRQ's asset portfolio align with these needs, how do AHRQ assets fit in the context of other related offerings, what are the opportunities to meet these needs better through AHRQ assets and beyond. We also need to document the future state everyone is collectively pushing toward. This means understanding what a more desirable state looks like for meeting the information needs of patients, care teams, and everyone who supports their interactions. And what is the role for resources from AHRQ and other sources in meeting those needs? And how are these assets best deployed and used? We'll apply the insights from this analysis to identify one or more use cases for AHRQ offerings and design and execute a concept demonstration of what an important part of this future state might look like. We hope this work will enhance or stimulate similar demonstrations beyond AHRQ information within this stakeholder community. Based on the current and future state analysis and the concept demonstration, we'll synthesize a roadmap for how better delivery, uptake, and implementation of AHRQ resources can drive progress toward the quadruple aim. Again, we hope the stakeholder community collaborations on these deliverables will help other stakeholders enhance their own care transformation roadmaps. So to summarize, we'll define AHRQ's role in delivering a desired future state and begin taking steps in that direction, while at the same time also accelerating and enhancing the care transformation journey for each of you and your organizations. This work to synthesize the current and future state descriptions and do concept demonstration roadmaps will be highly collaborative. The project team will develop these draft frameworks, diagrams, and documents as we started to do in these kickoff slides and share them with the stakeholder community for feedback. One key channel for this collaboration will be regular meetings like this one. They'll be much more interactive in this call, and we recognize that only a fraction of the stakeholder community members will be able to make any given call. In addition to developing and refining the deliverables during the call, we'll also gather input and feedback asynchronously between the calls. We could also meet in person opportunistically, for example, at the upcoming HIMSS conference. I'll get back to this at the end of the call to get input on whether or not there's interest in doing that. We'll be using the online collaboration platform Confluence for our asynchronous work together. We'll also use a listserv for the project. Again, more on that to come. Let me emphasize again, the project team will do the heavy lifting on creating the project deliverables. Our ask of the stakeholder community and each of you is mainly to scan the materials we create and provide feedback and pointers to pertinent materials we should consider. If most of the roughly 100 or so members we've engaged so far do that for an hour or so a month, we should be able to fully deliver on our very ambitious goals. Here's the timeline for what we're delivering between now and the end of October. As we've seen, the interactions with the stakeholder community through regular meetings and online interactions will drive deliverable creation and vetting throughout the project. Again, largely driven by work of the project team, with the stakeholder community being kind of the vetters and the, you missed X, Y, or Z kind of things. So our initial focus over the next few months will be documenting the current and desired future states and activities to bridge the gap for evidence-based care and care transformation. As those pictures come together around April, we'll begin defining use cases for highly desired AHRQ offerings and then plan and implement concept demonstrations for better delivery and use of these offerings. Building on the ecosystem analysis and the concept demonstration work, during the summer, we'll begin crafting a roadmap for how AHRQ can more fully meet care transformation needs. Again, we really hope that these AHRQ-focused concept demonstration and roadmap deliverables will stimulate or enhance related demonstrations and roadmaps beyond AHRQ assets by other stakeholder community participants as a direct outgrowth of the work that we're doing together. So let's pause here to make sure everyone is getting a sense of what we're trying to do and how we're proposing to do it, and most importantly, why participating in this work is valuable for you and your organization. For example, by helping you leverage evidence-based resources from AHRQ and others better, and by enhancing your current care transformation collaborations and efforts. So if you could please chat in any questions or comments you have about this, or if you want to speak, click the raise hand button to be added to the queue. So Kat, let me turn it over to you to sort of help us triage if there's any questions via the chat or anybody who's raised their hand to be recognized.
Thank you, Jerry. At this time, I haven't seen any chat questions, and I'm just scanning to see if we have any raised hands. Any questions at this time? I don't see any raised hands at this moment.
So we have 70 people on the line right now, many of whom I've known for decades now. So if anybody is actually listening to this conversation, even if you just type in a, yes, I'm here, and we understand what you're saying, that would be really helpful. Otherwise, we'll assume that all 70 of you are multitasking and doing other things. How long is the project going to last, says Frank Sonnenberg. So as per this thing back here, what we're focused on right now we actually started late last year to put this together. We've obviously done a lot of preliminary work to get this material off the ground. This formal project, at the end of this round of deliverables that we're going to be producing, so the current state analysis, the future state analysis, the concept demonstrations, designing them and executing them, and drafting the initial roadmap, all that will happen at the end of this federal fiscal year, so the end of this coming October. Okay. Are there any specific projects or exemplars to demonstrate this concept? Yes, so why don't we push on, Jonathan, I think we'll be able to get to your question in just a little bit. Yeah, so let's dig into some more details. The purpose of stopping here was just get a sense of if people overall were clear on what we were going to try to do, when we were going to try to do it, all those things. So let's dive now into some further details. And again, please feel free, if as I'm presenting material you have any questions about it or comments or suggestions, please let's use the chat richly for that. So in the next set of slides that are coming up now, we'll dive into more detail about the deliverables we'll be creating. This slide is an overview of the key deliverable elements. The foundation for our work is understanding the key consumers of evidence-based information and tools, what their needs are, and high priority use cases for how they consume needed material. We need a picture of what's going on today to address these needs. For example, what tools are people using from AHRQ and other sources? How is the information delivered to users? What's working and what's problematic in these processes? I mean, most or all of us sort of deal with this on a daily basis, but the idea is to sort of synthesize what's rattling around in our head or pull together documents where this has already been synthesized. Essentially, we're all working to improve healthcare information flow. We need to summarize the thrust of these efforts since they provide the momentum we can leverage to further accelerate progress toward transformation goals. And of course, we need to summarize those goals so we have a clear shared picture of the desired future we're trying to achieve. We know that there's a lot of information in various places about these issues and plan to fully leverage it rather than reinventing any wheels that already exist. This picture of the care transformation ecosystem will underpin the concept demonstration and roadmap for better use and value from AHRQ resources, and again, hopefully foster or enhance other roadmaps and demonstrations by stakeholder community members. So we've assumed so far that the quadruple aim, that is better health, patient and care team experience, and resource utilization, is the North Star we're all driving toward. A first step in understanding goals is to ensure that this is in fact true. It would be great if you could use the chat now, and again, I'll keep going on, but if you can just share your feedback now, whether at a top level using the quadruple aim captures exactly what you and your organizations are working toward, or if it's something else, let us know in the chat what that is. Again, we might not be able to fully discuss all that today, but that'll all be fodder for the next round of material that we develop and feed back to you. So on this and the next several slides are graphics that we can adapt into frameworks for fleshing out the current and future state details. It may be that there are other better frameworks we could use than the ones that I'll be sharing, and we would welcome any input you have about this. The diagram on this particular slide uses the virtuous cycle we presented earlier and has a few more details about Know What Works resources, and just highlights a very few of the many challenges related to the Apply What Works step. The framework on this slide focuses on that Apply What Works activity we're all currently having a lot of trouble with. It can be used to illustrate that there are various information consumers with different needs, that these individuals use various channels to access needed information and tools, and that these channels draw on many, many different resources. We need to address these what works dimensions in all of our deliverables, the current state, the future state, the pilots, the roadmap, et cetera. This slide presents the CDS 5 rights framework. That's a widely recommended and used approach for improving care processes and outcomes. It extends a simpler Apply What Works framework from the previous slide by adding additional information delivery dimensions and emphasizing that some configurations for each dimension will be more valuable in driving particular desired improvements. Clearly, there's a complex and diverse universe of consumers for information and resources to optimize care. Patients, or perhaps people more broadly, are the center of the entire healthcare enterprise. So they're a good starting point for sorting out the players and their needs. They have questions such as, what should I know and do to optimize the aspects of my health that I care most about? Clinicians and care teams more broadly need support for applying what's known to help individuals and patients achieve their health-related goals, and so on for additional onion layers of roles that support optimal care and outcomes. So this is just an initial very rough skeleton for what will hopefully grow into a much more rich analysis of who the stakeholders are and what are their needs. This slide is a much richer sample framework for outlining the current and future information states. It presents more detailed steps and information flows within and across the know what works, apply what works, and good outcomes components of the learning health system virtuous cycle. It also illustrates that typically things that happen typically within and or outside care delivery organizations, which could help with further sorting out the information users and needs at each one of these steps. In the coming weeks, we'll refine or replace this framework, ideally leveraging helpful related frameworks that are already being used by you and others successfully. And again, we need you to help us identify these things so that we can filter into the mix. And again, entering those into the chat or in subsequent dialogue would be very much appreciated. So this slide isn't meant to be read on the screen now, but it contains links to many of the resources in AHRQ's large portfolio of what works offerings. The important point to make here is that these AHRQ resources have been organized into the same steps that we outlined on the last slide. So this kind of sorting tees up a deeper dive into the users and uses for these resources, which in turn tees up explorations into how these resources can be organized, delivered, and implemented better to meet specific user needs more efficiently and effectively. So this slide illustrates, oops, got ahead of myself here. This slide illustrates one way to look at how AHRQ could improve dissemination of its resources so they create more lift for evidence-informed care delivery and transformation. So these arrows illustrate that AHRQ funds research and supports evidence and data synthesis and dissemination, and then these assets are then implemented to support clinical practice. The large disc on the left outlines the rich portfolio of AHRQ offerings and also that they are highly siloed right now. The disc at the bottom reinforces that there are many other related information sources that are widely used to address the kinds of needs we've been talking about. This cloud illustrates current thinking about possible ways to better find, disseminate, and support implementation of AHRQ resources in the context of all the other options. A key element is providing an AHRQ evidence marketplace to serve up its vast offerings to a broader open source array of sophisticated delivery channels. The diagram illustrates the importance of breaking down the AHRQ knowledge silos so that the information delivered is optimized for many different needs and not constrained by the structure or nature of the source. The diagram also raises the question of whether AHRQ should seek to include non-AHRQ offerings in its knowledge mashup, or alternatively, are there external mashups that AHRQ should leverage in serving its offerings most useful for addressing a particular need? As we've emphasized, the goal is to better support care delivery and care transformation by getting the CDS-5 rights right and other good things like that, especially for priority use cases with the greatest benefit for the most patients. So this slide teases out some specific pressing needs AHRQ welcomes stakeholder input on sooner rather than later. At a high level, these relate to validating and fleshing out the evidence marketplace approach outlined on the previous slide. And more specifically, are there approaches to managing the content better that would best align with transformation ecosystem needs and evolution? For example, approaches to indexing and integrating the knowledge silos. Likewise, for approaches to delivering the content. For example, what are the priorities and desired attributes for search and browse functionality and for health IT integration? Are there preferred strategies for addressing how AHRQ offerings could be delivered and consumed in the context of all the other available resources? These aren't philosophical issues. AHRQ is poised to evaluate ways to move forward with better content management and delivery approaches and is counting on the stakeholder community to ensure that these next steps deliver optimal value for each of your efforts and for care delivery and transformation throughout the country. Your input will help ensure that the hundreds of millions of dollars we have collectively invested in AHRQ will yield the greatest returns. So again, there are many important and valuable initiatives that seek to improve information flows in ways that are related to goals that AHRQ and the broader care transformation ecosystem share. This slide illustrates a tiny fraction of this initiative alphabet soup. So we have HSPC, HL7 EVM, FIRE on, and open info button, HL7 OMG's HSSP, CDC's ACG, NLM's Medline Plus Connect, MCVK, MOUSC. I mean, just on and on and on. There's just an explosion of activities out there. So our current state documentation will include an overview of these efforts and their implications for getting to the future state. Again, we'd love it if you could chat into, enter into the chat any other big rocks, right now, so that they're incorporated in our next iteration of this work that we should include in the analysis, as well as if there are any resources that provide an integrated overview of this alphabet soup of activity, that would be very helpful as well. So this slide outlines details we'll need to address in the future state description. That is, what will it look like when everyone is optimally, or at least better, leveraging assets from AHRQ and others to satisfy care delivery and transformation needs? What do the drivers look like? For example, what are the priority needs and use cases? How are the assets served up, integrated into information systems, and then into workflow to ultimately improve care processes and outcomes? The future state deliverable will provide actionable, best guess consensus answers to these questions. Okay, so let's pause again here, and we're actually somewhat ahead of schedule, so there's really a lot of time for hopefully some rich discussion. So again, you can continue to add via chat. You can press the button to raise your hand, because like I said, there will be time to call on people and to have some interactive discussion. Again, there's 74 people on this call, so I don't think everybody will be able to speak, but for those of you who have something on your mind that you want to share, we'd love to hear your voice and engage you directly. So some of the kinds of things, and we can cycle back to this, but just to tee up some of the things that we'd love to get some feedback on now is, with this additional information I've just shared, are you getting a sense of the ACTS deliverables that the project team will create? How we'd like at least your light but focused input on what that can help us get these deliverables right. Do you have any quick feedback or input right now on the embryonic content and framework that we've laid out on the the previous few slides? Any input? We have some time to hear thoughts about the AHRQ evidence marketplace. Again, this is a really high priority, understanding how the kinds of things that AHRQ is thinking about doing to serve all of you better, align up with the things that you're doing and with what you need. So getting some feedback or input on that would be terrifically helpful. And then,
so Jerry, we do have a number of questions that I've been collecting that I've put in some categories. If we could get started with those. So far, there's been several questions around this idea of just clarifying exactly what the project is about. There have been some about connections to other work that is existing that we want to make sure that we have touch points to. And there's been a few questions about the stakeholder community. So I'd like to start with that first area about clarifying the nature of this project and read you just a few questions and allow you to respond before we move on to the next, if that's okay.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Sounds great.
So Jonathan Teisch had talked a little bit about clarifying that the goal. Is this a library, a standard, an exchange format, a toolbox that basically allows all organizations to drop in evidence in a practical and usable form? And then also Ken Rubin has asked whether or not this is an inventory, an efficacy analysis, or perhaps both of these. And of course, Jonathan Teisch has also asked for some specific exemplars. So I think going back and maybe just clarifying again the exact nature of this project.
Great. So that's fantastic. So let me return to this slide here, slide 19. And again, Steve is quite sick today, but Steve, I would invite you to jump in if you want to. I'll take a first whack at it to save your voice, but if you want to jump in to sort of clarify or correct anything that I say, please do. So in terms of what is this project? So what we're trying to accomplish by the end of October, this coming October, is to help AHRQ address the issue that's laid out on this slide. There is an extremely robust portfolio of resources, again, funded to the tune of several $100 million of taxpayer money per year, that creates this very, very rich and powerful collection of resources. And a lot of really smart people at AHRQ, Steve, and many, many others appreciate the fact that because these things are so siloed right now, they're not delivering their full potential. So at a very, very high level, what ACTS is about is AHRQ wants to do a better job of serving up these assets so that they will meet the needs of the people that consume them, or the people that aren't consuming them but could and should be consuming them, much better. So the fundamental question that ACTS is trying to answer is, what does AHRQ need to do to serve this information up better so that it is more broadly and efficiently and effectively supporting evidence-based care and evidence-based care transformation? So at the core, ACTS is trying to answer that question. So what's in the middle of the cloud here is, so some of the things that AHRQ realizes that it needs to do is it's thinking about having this evidence marketplace. So rather than saying, here are our goodies, you can sort of get them, you sort of get the whole package of, the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force information, the stuff that comes out of the evidence-based practice centers, and on and on and on. CDS interventions from CDS Connect, rather than just saying, here is a whole range of different kinds of offerings that we have. The way that they're currently configured right now, they're not really optimized for getting, let's say, the CDS-5 rights right for a patient who has a question about, their hypertension or whatever, or somebody who's delivering care, who's working in some kind of electronic information workflow tool, who's looking for a specific nugget of information. So what this project is all about is trying to understand how AHRQ can leverage this sort of alphabet soup of initiatives that are trying to figure out how to in more robust and sophisticated ways get little kernels of knowledge so that they're delivered to just the right people at the right times in the right formats, et cetera. So for AHRQ, an output of this project, the demonstration of concept and the roadmap, is to answer the question, what does this next generation of information delivery look like? So that's what the concept demonstration is going to try to answer. And what is the roadmap for starting to turn this aircraft carrier? So rather than putting out all these wonderful databases that it has been doing for many, many years, instead of putting out databases, they're putting out resources that are much more finely tuned to addressing the information needs that people who are trying to make evidence-based care and care transformation happen to serve those needs better. So the roadmap and the concept demonstration will answer that question. The reason why we're going through, sort of all this other mishigas with the stakeholder community and all these people and all this other stuff is, AHRQ could hire a few consultants to, sort of sit in a room and try to figure out how to do that, but recognizing that the goal is ultimately to meet the needs of what's going on out there all across the country. The idea is to put together this stakeholder community to answer specific, to help convey information about what that world needs, so that AHRQ, rather than making guesses about what's going to be valuable and helpful, can sort of do its work based on pull from the environment, rather than just creating something, pulling the sheet off and saying, ta-da, look at the great stuff that we did, to produce stuff that will absolutely be more valuable in meeting these pressing needs that exist right now. So in terms of what is this, what will it create, by the end of October, we will have created this concept demonstration, we will have created this roadmap of next generation of delivering AHRQ assets. But in order to get there, that's why we have to go through all this other work of rounding up the stakeholder community that reflects this extremely broad and diverse group of stakeholders out in the marketplace, and distilling all this information. So the way that we get to a roadmap and a concept demonstration that's going to really be, world-changing, or going to be something that is a huge step forward, in order to have it get there, we have to make sure we understand what the environment is doing. We have to sort of organize all this tremendous complexity. So that's where the current state and the future state and the what is everybody trying to do to get from here to there, we need to understand those so that AHRQ can kind of skate to where the puck is going to be, as opposed to just making guesses about what it needs to do better. So hopefully that provides a sharper picture. And on the basis, so in some ways, what will come out of this project is a proposal to the agency about things that the market wants and needs to, so that all this investment that we're all making and that the AHRQ staff is making in producing this material, so that there's a much stronger return on that. So AHRQ will receive that proposal and make decisions about whether and how to turn the aircraft carrier, or to get the puck to skate to where this puck is heading.
Thank you, Jerry. There's a fair number of questions where people have recommendations for either there's, how it's connected to similar efforts that perhaps are going on, or making sure that we are connected to other environments like CBS books and, some of the ONC proposals for reducing administrative burden. So I know that we can't address all of that in this call, but what will be our approach to identifying those other types of efforts and how to make sure that we're connected to the right groups?
Great. So that's a terrific question. And I guess I want to, before I dive into that, I want to make one more point, and I emphasized it a lot of time, many times in sort of the prepared remarks earlier. But so what I emphasized just a moment ago in terms of the deliverables of this project, they're all very highly AHRQ focused. But the idea is that by bringing all of you together who are either current or potential AHRQ, consumers of AHRQ information or partners of AHRQ, by bringing you all together and helping to sort this out, by creating this picture of what's going on today and where everybody's trying to go and what the future state that everybody's heading toward looks like, by engaging everybody in this conversation. It's not just how can you help AHRQ help you better in terms of its information assets, but what we need to sort through, the things that we need to understand in order to get there. The hope and expectation is that they will be very highly valuable insights and syntheses for what all of you are trying to do. So I just wanted to add sort of that second point, that it's, yes, the core thing is developing a roadmap for what AHRQ can deliver next. And obviously there's no promises right now about what AHRQ is going to do based on the recommendations that come out of this project. But, AHRQ is spending, significant time and money to do this work, and it's doing that, so that because it wants to know what it needs to do, and then it'll have to figure out how, whether and how it can make those things happen. But again, hopefully there will be collateral benefits from everyone that go way beyond what AHRQ may or may not do next, that each of you will take away from participating in this effort. And then that is sort of a lead-in to this issue of, well, what about CDS hooks and what about a gazillion other things? Well, we didn't put all of your names here, although 71 of you are on this call right now. So we haven't done the mapping yet, but my guess is that we probably have at least one person from most, if not all, of the organization names that are listed here. And, for example, we don't have a direct representation of HL7, but there's a small army of you that are on this call that are kind of all over HL7's activities and many other kinds of activities. So the answer to the question, the high-level answer to the question, how are you going to make sure that you're connected to all of the things that are going on in the environment now that matter here? The answer to that question is we're hoping you are going to help us do that.
Okay. So, Jerry, there's been a couple of questions about the stakeholder community, and while the slide that you have posted is not 100%, totally representative of all stakeholders, we recognize there's some other groups in there. We do have some questions about that community. Also, who within the AHRQ silos, if you will be included and who's participating, but also who are these deliverables actually intended for health IT leaders, implementers, boots on the ground, for the vendors, all of the above. So maybe talking a little bit more about the stakeholder community.
Yeah, and again, it ties back to this. It's a nuanced theme that I just keep hitting over and over and over again. The fact that there's a duality between AHRQ is trying to answer some very specific questions. So within AHRQ, the consumers are pretty clear. So you can see from this table here that there's 22 people from AHRQ, and that includes the 4 of us consultants. So there's already 18 people, who work at AHRQ, who are AHRQ employees who are engaged in this project, including 16 from the Center for Evidence-Based Practice. So if we go back to that cloud diagram here, which I think is this guy. Hello?
I can hear you, Jerry.
Okay. Yeah, I was afraid. For some reason, the slide is not. Oh, here it is. Okay, I have to build it again. So the people that basically, those 18 people from AHRQ represent most or all of these silos. So when I said that there's kind of a duality, like who is the audience for this? I think it's helpful, and I probably should have made this clear in my comments, to look at, there's sort of 2 legs of this project. One leg is there's some very, very specific things that AHRQ wants to get out of this. And I just went over that sort of again in detail. AHRQ needs to answer these questions. What does it need to do to sort of build this cloud so it's meeting these needs better? So a core focus for what we're working on is to try to answer those questions for AHRQ. But as, again, I keep saying over and over again, we want to do that in a way that the output of that is not, I think it would be a very good thing if an output of that is if AHRQ produces material that can be consumed more efficiently and effectively in all of the things that the 100 of you are working on right now. I think that would be a really big win. Our goal is also to have things like the way we design the current state, the way we lay out the current state and the future state and all these other things. We'd like to have them be of value to each of you in your organizations, but we can't necessarily say what that is. So as we have this rich stakeholder forum that we're going to put together, we're going to use that to help answer these AHRQ-focused questions, but we're hoping that as a corollary of that, or as a byproduct of that, as we put together these diagrams that we have to make sure that they serve the AHRQ purpose, we would ideally like to do that in such a way that they're also useful for the transformation efforts that are going on in each of your organizations. So in terms of who is the audience for this, who is the consumer for this, it's whoever you want it to be. Whoever it needs to be in order for what it is that we're doing here to meet the needs of what all of you are trying to accomplish, in addition to meeting the needs of what AHRQ is trying to accomplish, as is laid out on this slide.
Okay. Jerry, I'm just going to look and see across all participants if we have any raised hands right now. We have gotten some very good questions. If you do have any questions you would like to ask, we have ample time for that. So let's just give it a minute instead of the chat function if you'd like to ask directly. Okay, well, people are waiting on that. We do have a few there was one particular question about a slide, the AHRQ-specific questions. Just to maybe go back and show that slide one more time so people can really see the answer, what it is that we're trying to get
at. The specific pressing AHRQ needs. So while we're doing that, let me hone in deeper on the answer I gave before by going back to Jonathan's question here, because I think this really shines a bright light on this nuance. So it says, so the goal is a library, standard, exchange format, toolbox, et cetera, that would allow lots of organizations to drop in evidence in a practical, usable form. Lots of folks in that broad space may be useful to EnviroScan current efforts in public and private sector. So let's unpack that, because there's a lot of really important things in there. So when you say, may be useful to EnviroScan current efforts in public and private sector, absolutely. So when I talk about this current state analysis, it is exactly that environmental scan. So there's the people that are on this call right now, each of you has your hands in many different and important things, or many of you do anyway. So the environmental scan is, you're looking over, for example, going back to slides like, the alphabet soup slide and say, well, there's 15 things that you didn't mention, and these are those 15 things, and ideally if there's a web link or something like that, that you can point us to. So absolutely, that environmental scan of what's happening currently in the public and private sector is a core part of what it is that we need to do, because AHRQ's deciding what steps it's going to take happens against the context of what's going on out in the environment. So yes, we will do an environmental scan, and we're absolutely counting on each and every one of you to help connect us with, with those pieces. So that's going to be critical. And again, we're not asking you to write the environmental scan. Just send us, a list, obviously with some, hopefully with some web links about what these things are that we need to make sure that we're considering. So that's to the environmental point. So when it says, so the other thing that I think is really important to try to unpack, because again, it gets right to the heart of the thing. So it says, so the goal is a library standard exchange format toolbox. So AHRQ has a library. So a core focus, so AHRQ would like to take its library and put it into, use standards and put it into an exchange format and put it into a toolbox for AHRQ. So AHRQ absolutely wants to do that, and it wants to know how to do all these things, how to integrate the silos, how to have a common taxonomy, how to enable browsing and searching of that repository, how to slice it and dice it so that it integrates better into health IT systems, so that people, can have, overviews of what kind of information is available to zero in, if you're interested in a particular question, rather than having to spelunk through, a dozen or 2 dozen or 3 dozen different databases or search on the, put the search term into the AHRQ website as it currently exists now and get a gazillion different hits, that if you're a specific role trying to get a specific thing done, it's going to be much more efficient and effective for you to get that as an end user. If you're a health IT supplier, AHRQ wants to make it easier for you to integrate these assets into your systems so that you can serve them up to the care delivery teams and the patients and all that other kind of stuff. So again, so AHRQ is going to have a library. AHRQ is going to have mechanisms that it's going to push this stuff out at, but it absolutely does not want to do this in a one-off fashion. It wants to do it in a way that aligns with how the marketplace is evolving, how all that alphabet soup of activities is trying to push the marketplace. So it's a delicate dance here, so that on the one hand, and let me see if I can get this thing so on the one hand, AHRQ needs to figure out what it's going to do inside here. But to get to Jonathan's question, so AHRQ is not going to propose a universal standard that everybody use, or within the ACTS project, we're not necessarily going to be able to answer the question, what should the whole rest of the universe do? We certainly need to answer the question, what should AHRQ do in light of where the puck is heading? Hopefully, I think it's, we'd have to sort through to what extent, let's put it, to at least some extent, we'd like to wrestle down some of these larger questions. So to understand if there is some sort of composite picture about where this alphabet soup is driving to within this project, we'd like to at least have that high-level overview, because that will help answer the question, what should AHRQ do? So within the ACTS project, we might not be able to get all these folks sort of marching in step and integrate them all. I mean, if we could do that, that would be awesome. And I think we have at least a chance of doing that just because there's so many, smart, effective people who've been working on this for a very long time, and others who've been working on it less time who are involved in this effort. So if we could wrestle this all into sort of a common shared vision about how all these pieces fit together, or if that common shared vision already exists, that's fantastic. But we'll try to push at least the picture of where the puck is going to as clear and as actionable a picture as we can, so AHRQ knows where to skate to.
Jerry, thank you. Wonderful. Thank you, Amal. We do have a hand up by Evan Ornstein.
Yep. Evan, take it away.
Hey, this is Evan Ornstein at Emory University in Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. I was just calling, wanted to jump in to first highlight a point I think Maria Michaels had made and a couple others had talked about, of thinking about this a little bit from a user-centered design perspective and user stories. And in particular, I'm thinking a lot of people on this call are probably much more aware of AHRQ resources than sort of most people trying to improve healthcare quality. And I was just curious if there are thoughts on how we think about the needs of the kinds of users who aren't necessarily on this call, and if developing kind of user stories as a way to think about how somebody who wants to do these things but doesn't necessarily have as much awareness takes advantage of AHRQ resources, if that might be helpful.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Evan. And what we're doing, so what you're talking about is sort of a core element of how we're going to do this. So AHRQ wants to develop what ACTS will develop, one of the deliverables is this demonstration of concept of what next generation information delivery looks like. In order to do that, we have to identify a high priority use case. So we're going to work with the stakeholder community to identify what this high priority use case is. And in parallel with that, we also need to understand who, as you were saying, Evan, who all the different consumers of this information are, what the needs that those different consumers have, and then exemplify, some subset of those focused on a specific target. And again, if it were something like opioids or hypertension or preventive care, where AHRQ already has quite a bit of information, that would be fantastic. So yes, we have to figure out who all the users are. We have to figure out what all their needs are. We have to figure out what the use cases are, and user stories and user-centered design, and all the other things that people are talking about now about how you create things that actually meet real-world needs as opposed to just sit on the shelf. We need to wrap all of that into what we're doing. So this has been absolutely fantastic. We're kind of coming down the home stretch here. There's some housekeeping things that we need to do before we close out. So again, we'll digest what was in the chat. We'll follow up with you after this call, and we will continue this dialogue. So where we are now is, so the questions on the table now is, where do we go from here? So the next steps that we'd like to take with you are establishing a regular meeting schedule, recognizing only a fraction of the stakeholder community will be on any given call. We'd like to have these calls every other week, starting in 2 weeks, using the same time slot. And again, there will be much, much more real-time interaction in these subsequent calls than we were able to have today. I'm going to do much, much less talking and much more listening. The upcoming HIMP conference is a potential opportunity for some of us to meet face-to-face, although we realize this might not be feasible given everybody's packed schedule. We'd like to continue the dialogue on creating the ACT deliverables, all these great questions that were teed up today between now and the next meeting. And once again, a particular interest is understanding better how AHRQ assets currently support your work and how they can do so better. So we welcome any input before the next meeting on anything we've discussed today or that you think is important. We'll use an ACT listserv as the primary channel for these in-between meeting interactions until we get the Confluence site set up. The project team will establish regular meetings based on input. We'll do a doodle poll for HIMSS meeting if there's interest in that. We'll launch the listserv and the Confluence site, and we'll prepare for the next very highly interactive meeting. So I'm trying to get to the next slide here. There we go. So if you haven't already, please chat in your thoughts about the proposed every other other week meeting frequency and time slot, and if you'd be interested in meeting at HIMSS. So especially right now, if any of you are interested in meeting at HIMSS, please enter into that chat. If it looks like there's a critical mass, then we can do a doodle poll to try to nail down the specifics. If that's not going to work, that's fine too. But again, if it is something that you'd be interested in at least trying, please type that in. That would be great. And also now we're coming down the home stretch. We have just a very few minutes left. So sort of now is the time, if there's something that you've been wondering about as this is unfolded about, what we're doing or how we're trying to do it, or any other specific comment about something that we should be thinking about, we'd love to hear that now. So it looks like there's at least 2 people that have said that they're interested in HIMSS.
Jerry, this is Kat. There was one other comment that came up that I think is really important that I want to make sure participants know that we're thinking about. We're just not there yet. And that is to ensure that this idea of the quadruple aim, that we really have measurable KPIs to evaluate success. So again, back to this idea of metrics and knowing how did we get there and have we made a difference? And again, that was just a comment if you'd like to respond to that at all.
Kat, do you want to take a whack at it? I know this is something that you're particularly passionate about. Do you want to take a crack?
So I was just thrilled to see the question. It's something that we have been discussing internal to the team, is recognizing that we're attempting to make these resources more available, more consumable in the context of the care environments that are out there, of which there are many. It's a question that I've been asking all along, is how do we know if we've gotten there, and how will we define success? I can tell you we do not have the answers to that. We have some notional ideas, but we think it's very important as these discussions ensue that that's a critical part of the discussion, that we get some baseline information through our discussions. We understand what the current environment is, and as we attempt to move forward and make some of these changes and collect the input, that we know what we're looking for on the other side to know whether or not we've affected change. So to the extent that all of you can be thinking about that and what would constitute measurable progress over the life of this project, I believe that we'll see that on a future agenda.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Kat. So we're just coming up to the wire. One of the things that I think would be really helpful, and I see people are already starting to drop off for their next calls, but before you drop off, if you could just put a note into the chat if you've heard anything that you think will be valuable to you in what you're doing. If you could just sort of put a brief word about that, either just, yes, I think this might be valuable, or if there's ideas that are popping up in your mind about what the synergies between what we're doing and what you're doing look like, it'd be really helpful to hear that. Because again, AHRQ basically is trying to serve your needs better. We're trying to figure out how to do that even more broadly than just by delivering AHRQ assets more effectively. So any ideas or hints or clues you can give us about sort of what value looks like to you, or how you're thinking that this work might help you, if you have any thoughts about that and can chat them in, that would be terrific. Give it just a pause to see if there's any hands raised or any additional comments for us to address. Kat, is there anything else that was raised that?
There is one other. Frank Sonnenberg had just talked about, he made the comment about the recent AMIA draft proposal. I believe it was a comment that went into an ONC request for comments on reducing administrative and regulatory burden for physicians. I also know that the American Nursing Informatics Association put in a response, and I've seen that. And he just said, will some of this work perhaps have an opportunity to be linked to or put into that particular framework? And there's a touch point there. So it could be something as a future agenda item that we pick up as well.
Absolutely. And I think a good way to close is to say that, it's going to take a big village to do all the things we want to do. And, there's 100 people that we've invited to, that have signed up to participate already. There are, there were over 70 people that were on this call today. And, it's the more the merrier kind of thing. So if there are people that are not connected here that should be, please do let us know. It's the top of the hour, and we're going to respect your time. We started on time. We're going to end on time. Thank you all very, very much. We're really excited. We are going to do great things together. Thanks very much, and you'll be hearing from us soon via the listserv, and we'll answer any questions we didn't get to today. Thanks much, everybody. Have a great day.